ready?
Yeah, we're rolling. We're going.
All right. So, Stephen, what was and is the number one difficulty that you've had with your dyslexia, even though you've just been diagnosed only a few years ago?
Yeah, 5 years ago I was diagnosed as having been dyslexic for my entire life, and which explained a lot of things. It was like the last puzzle part in a tremendous mystery that I've kept to myself all these years.
Yeah.
That basically started with just things that happen when you're a kid in school and you're a slow reader.
Yeah.
And in my case, I was actually unable to read for at least 2 years. I was 2 years behind the rest of my class. And of course I went through what everybody goes through, is teasing.
Yeah.
And I had to go through that for a long time. And so the teasing, led to a lot of other problems I was having in school, but it all stemmed from the fact that I was embarrassed to stand up in front of the class and read.
So you have always kind of known that you were a little different than everybody else.
Yeah.
How has making friends been for you when you were a kid, and what was that like?
Well, I could make friends in sort of my own, social circle,
Sure.
and my social circle was probably a pretty big social circle because it was a lot of kids who had, let's put it this way: my friends couldn't throw a football. They couldn't catch a baseball.
Like the Goonies.
You got it. That's why I made the Goonies. That's why I wrote the story, because I was a member of the Goon Squad when I was a kid growing up. But all of my friends, as it turns out, as we all grew up, they all had different kinds of disabilities. They had different kinds of dysregulations, and we all had a lot of stuff in common. Not the least of which, several of us were dyslexic. And dyslexia, of course, was the first thing that led me to realize that I was different. Although I didn't have a name for it, I just knew that I dreaded going to school. Because if I was called on, and I was told to stand in the front of the class and open my book and read from the book in the 3rd grade, it would that day would be another long day in a long series of the worst days of my life.
Was there ever a teacher that said, because normally the curing of dyslexia or the coping starts with a caring teacher saying, there's something a little different about you and I would like to help you. Was there ever a teacher that said, we should work on this together?
Yes, there was. There were teachers that didn't quite understand why I was so behind the rest of the class in my reading skills, and talked to my parents about it. But there was nothing, we're talking about the 1950s, and there was not a program. There were not books being written about dyslexia. Nobody diagnosed me as being dyslexic, and so all they could do was assume that I wasn't studying hard enough, that I wasn't reading hard enough, that I was perhaps lazy. Yes.
And which one of your parents were more involved in helping you in school?
My mom.
Your mom, yeah.
My mom was involved in things like, English and my dad was very involved with me with math and history. But they were both really, really caring parents in terms of my keeping up with my studies. And they were very, very strict about the homework, and they're very, very strict that the television set was not to go on until they checked my homework.
Yeah. Well,
same old, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you got bullied, how did you deal with that?
I got bullied. I dealt with it by making movies.
Yeah.
I mean, making movies was my cover-up.
What was the hardest time for you in school that you remember?
Well, it was just that period, I think, of probably junior high, I would say, in about 7th, 8th grade, and also some high school. I think junior high. Kids, before they start to see themselves from, the point of view of others, can be really, really harsh, really, really mean. Yeah. And they can't help it, and they don't even know they're being mean.
Exactly, yeah.
So as an adult, I can look back and I don't have any...
They don't realize the damage they're doing.
I have no resentment or anything to what I went through as a kid, because I kind of understand it.
Sure.
But at the same time, I think it was those junior high school years that were the hardest for me.
Yeah. Well, I think that's just the hardest time for every kid because every kid is crazy whether you have dyslexia or not.
Well, we all have a lot of energy growing
Yeah,
up.
yeah, we're
And
constantly
that
changing.
energy can be put to constructive use, and sometimes it can be put to damaging use
Yeah.
when you bully someone else, when you tease someone else, when
Yeah.
you want to feel like you have absolute power.
We don't know how to handle it.
Very, very hard to, when you have that much to say.
Yeah.
And sometimes what you have to say is being said against others to make yourself
Hurts
feel
others.
superior.
Yeah.
And other times, but I never felt like a victim. That was the important thing. I never felt like a victim. I think movies really helped me, kind of saved me from shame, from guilt, from putting it on myself when it wasn't really, my own burden. It wasn't my burden.
Sure.
And I think making movies was my great escape. That's really how I was able to get away from all of that.
And you think that can kind of show through your movies, you showed like how you felt or, just what you felt about the world or what you felt about people teasing you, I guess, or what you were going through?
Not really. My first movies didn't do that. My first movies were just basically imitations of movies I was going out to theaters to see. So they were pure, genre movies, war movies, westerns, science fiction.
Well,
and there were no statements. I made no statements. I'm talking about my 8mm movies. I'm going way back before I became a director.
Yeah.
And I'm just saying that in light of feeling a little bit like an outsider, movies made me feel inside my own skill set.
Do you wish that you were diagnosed earlier than you were?
Yes.
Why?
Because I wish I had somebody helping me to understand that there were many, many others like me. And even my own friends who we weren't even able to articulate what was going on in our lives. I know several of my friends were just like me, but we didn't have the skills to talk to each other about it.
Sure.
And I wish I had somebody in my life then that was really able to do an intervention and get me through those rough years.
Because I know the only reason why I ask you is because sometimes when kids are diagnosed, they don't want anything to do with it. And, it sounds like you would, go out to get help immediately.
Yeah, because, I don't want to put a Band-Aid on something. I want to, figure out how to make it go away forever. And the other thing is, I'm in a business right now where reading is very important. It's of critical importance to me that I read books and scripts and so I've been able to overcompensate. And I just basically, with never feeling ashamed of myself, will take, 2 hours and 45 minutes to 3 hours to read 120 pages. It takes me about 2 hours, 45 minutes to read what most people can read in about an hour and 10 minutes. And I just know I'm still slow at reading, but I've learned to adjust. I read often, but I'm very, and here's a great thing also, I have great comprehension in what I read because I do read slowly. I retain almost everything I read. I don't just skip over things. And I'm able to appreciate the writing. I'm able to kind of really savor good writing because I really take my time going through a book or a script.
I read that you dropped out of high school, but you went back to high school. Is that right?
I dropped out of college.
You dropped out of college,
Right.
and then you were honored by the same college that...
Well, I was. What happened was I began having children of my own. I dropped out of college to be a director when I was 21 or 22 years old. And I still had a couple of years left, and I think I was a sophomore when I really dropped out. And I started having kids, and my kids started growing up, and they began saying, "Well, Dad never went to college." And so I went back to Long Beach State, and I was able to get the credits that I was never able to achieve then because my career got in way of my education. And I was able to go back into school again, and I was able to graduate with the graduating class with the mortarboard and the whole regalia. And that was an amazing experience. I had my mom and dad with me. All my kids came to the graduation. And they all realized that when you start something, you should finish it.
Was there a specific reason other than your kids that you left college?
I left college because I got a job directing television. In 1969, and it was just a great opportunity. And I didn't just leave college; I fled from school to be a director.
So one of the things I really want to know is what was it like getting honored by the Queen of England?
It was a great honor. It wasn't. It was the Queen. Selected me to become a honorary knight of the British Empire called KBE, and it was presented to me by the British ambassador
Wow.
in Washington, D.C.
Oh, really?
a number of years ago, and it's a great honor.
So if you had any advice to give for young kids who have dyslexia and who are just finding out what they're going through now, what would you tell them?
Just that it's more common than than you've ever could imagine, and that you're not alone.
Yeah.
And that there are ways to accelerate your reading skills, to accelerate your comprehension, and there are ways to deal with it. It's not an incurable thing. It's something you're going to have the rest of your life, but you can sort of, dart between the raindrops to get where you want to go, and it will not hold you back.
Yeah. Thank you very much,
Quinn,
Stephen.
thank you.